Welcome back, ninja community and persons that want to learn something very ninja. In this video, I'm going to be covering the difference between Kata and Bonki. Okay, now there's different terms, there's different languages, but for simplicity, we're going to stick to just the Japanese. I think that's the version, Japanese of Kata and Bonki. Okay, and I'll even cover some demonstrations of techniques to give you a better understanding, and of course how it could apply with weapons as well as unarmed. Okay, and give you more of some context of how some art forms apply with different various weapons and how some moves might not make any sense. However, if you get into their weapon or that style's weapon, it would reveal the significance of why some moves are done certain ways. Okay, but before I get into that, as ninja knowledge is could be considered deadly or lethal, I will go over my quality statement and disclaimer, mostly out of liability, and that is, just bear with me as I run through this. The viewer understands my quality statement and disclaimer video. Additionally agrees that this video could be treated as is with ballistic protection, which in short means I don't have a seal on it, therefore I don't guarantee the techniques and or your application of the techniques. And if you're watching this video with the intention of using any of its content in committing a crime, that is additionally a crime. Actually using any of my content in committing a crime is a crime. And I guess I'll talk a little bit about why I use that term, ballistic protection. That means, see, at least from the universe I'm from, at one point in time, the companies that made like bulletproof vests and things like that, they made sure that they could sell their products without being inhibited. And by doing this, they pretty much put those that would enforce any laws to prohibit them, they pretty much got them to where either no company that made ballistic protection would sell to them to be able to enforce those laws, or they actually had to pass legislation to protect the companies that manufactured ballistic protective gear. Okay, they also even made it to where the state could fine them. If I recall from the universe I'm from, they could fine people up to $80,000 for just one violation. But won't really get into much, ninja legal stuff. I've already been irritated enough with that. What I will talk about though is some context of some techniques and the difference between Kata and Bonki. Now, Kata is basically the dance version of a technique, okay? And the Bonki has very similar translations, right? It could mean how it applies. Bonki could mean attack or to do something swiftly or with purpose. Like if someone said, hey, you go sweep the floor, if you said Bonki and grab the broom, you would be doing it with a sense of urgency and purpose, and you would be attacking. Basically, you would have a sense of attack or urgency while sweeping the floor. Okay, so, but Bonki in this context means how the Kata applies. Now there's even some experts within, or at least black belts within, different art forms that have even forgotten how some of their movements apply, okay, and the context. For instance, I've seen some MMA fighters out there get some things kind of out of context, like some techniques that doesn't seem like it has much application. However, you have to give it the context, okay? The context. When a Kata or technique, does it seem like it works? Yes, the person should question the technique and how it applies. Like there's some joint locks or or pressure point manipulation, joint manipulation, where like twisting the arm and pulling it is supposed to like make the person's shoulder drop lower and they should be like immobilized. Okay, this is not practical in everyday application, right? However, if you twisted someone's arm and pulled them, right, and if they were wearing armor, like samurai armor, one of the most least restrictive armors ever made, and I'm comparing that with like riot gear protection, right? If you twisted the arm and pulled it, usually the armor would cause the person to involuntarily move forward. That gives it the application of when your opponent is wearing armor, that joint manipulation actually has a purpose, okay? So, as some MMA fighters and UFC champions out there might have like thrown out some information about how some of it is malarkey, well, you have to look at how it applies, right? You have to look at when does this apply. And to be fair with them, even some black belts within those styles, like those different forms, where they still practice something and their students sometimes don't question how it's used, some of them have even forgotten how it applies, right? I've run across like a ninjutsu black belt who didn't understand how one joint lock actually applied, right? So you have to give it its context. Okay, in this video, I will give you a dance version of a technique. Okay, it has multiple applications, various ambiguous applications with different weapons. It can be done unarmed. Okay, and I will perform it as dance or Kata. Okay, it is, let's see, the technique. Let's see if I can demonstrate this in this lighting in this much room. Okay, so the technique here is the serpent causes a wave, right? It doesn't seem very flashy, right? However, and breaking it down into various different weapons, okay? Okay, breaking down its Bonki. So that would be the serpent causes a wave. It sounds pretty, much like ninja poetry, right? And it has variations of being used with different weapons. The technique is if my opponent is in a right forward stance or a left forward stance and is throwing a punch from the right or the left, this is a step to the side. I'm parrying the punch. If the punch was coming this way, right, the upper body strike. And as I have stepped to the side, I am diverting the power of the strike by transitioning my center, right? From here, what my hand has that another weapon typically does not have is I have the ability to grab, right? So as I have stepped to the side and parried their strike, and I would typically be grabbing their arm, right? So that looks again like this. From here, depending on which side they had thrown from, or if they were in a right forward stance or a left forward stance, I would either distract them by slapping them in the face or by breaking their arm. Okay, So in a dance version, or Kata version, it looks like this. Okay? In a self-defense version, it might look like this. Right? So that is the main difference. And of course, depending on the situation they were in, right, would be a different follow-up move. If I have distracted them by slapping them in the face, after that I could probably put them on the ground, right, by pulling their arm and pushing their head and twisting. Okay? Or if I had grabbed their arm and had struck at the joint and they didn't move that way, right, it would probably snap the arm. Okay? Making it very difficult for my opponent to throw another punch. Okay, so that was a ninja, or real shinobi technique broken into a Kata, or dance version, and broken down into a Bonki, how it applies. That was just one aspect of how that part could apply in a real self-defense situation. Okay. And of course, for it to be a real shinobi technique or ninja poetry, it would have to be ambiguous with what doing it unarmed or with weapons, various weapons, even if it's slightly modified without drastically modifying the movement. And I'll show that technique with some comma, right? And of course, the best place to hold a comma is in the center, much like most weapons. Most. So, from here, it is slightly modified without drastically modifying the movement. Okay, so if you've watched the video so far, you should probably hit like hard like a ninja and subscribe to my channel to be alerted for when I do videos on YouTube. And feel free to comment on this video and check out my other videos. And share my video with people who are ninja, but not with people who ought to be ninja, because they might accidentally learn something. Okay, so I will talk a little bit more about, suppose, Bruce Lee on not getting hung up on style. Bruce Lee said, don't get hung up on style. Now, there's different arts and forms. And some of the techniques hidden within their katas, you have to look at, in some cases, you have to look at what their weapon of choice was in that art form. For instance, there's capoeira. Now, there's some techniques that they do, like they turn on their hands and they throw kicks. Now, there has probably been very few effective capoeira fighters in MMA rings. However, if you throw in the context of their weapon, you have an understanding of why this art, why they do these flips. Because if your opponent had a torch, right, they would typically practice fire breathing, right, where they would use like starch and they would blow from a torch. And if your opponent, see, it would be same style versus same style. If your opponent was breathing fire at you, you might want to duck your head down occasionally. So, if they allowed a torch, like fire breathing, in an MMA ring, capoeira might have a little bit more of a fair advantage of, using its art in the ring. Okay? So, with as these techniques that I've shown, like even a machete or even a pocket knife, a real shinobi technique is ambiguous with just about every weapon, even bladed weapons. And let's see, even that same technique, right? A serpent causes a wave, and a follow-up technique could be slightly different, right? for a style or for a style to look at its Bonki, sometimes you got to look at its weapon. Sometimes you have to look at its enemy. What was it fighting, right? With ninjutsu, a lot of times they're fighting samurai, and samurai a lot of times wore armor, and sometimes real ninja or real shinobi, they wore armor too. So some of the movements that they do might be slightly restrictive. Okay. So let's see, another art form that seems a bit obscure if you don't consider its weapon. What is another art form that seems a bit obscure? Trying to think on that one. Another art form. Wait, see, here's another one. Okay, like you have some kung fu styles, like the legendary Ip Man. He established an art where the Tao was part of the art that he taught, right? If you look at some of their movements, now I could probably only tell you like maybe a grain of sand's worth of it, right? A part of the art he taught, like a very big knife. There's your application of some of the movements that might not make sense to most people. You have these art forms and they have real world applications. Okay? Real world applications. Real self-defense techniques. Now in an MMA ring you typically only have one person fighting one other person. And they all know that you can't poke the other person's eye. You can't do small joint manipulation. And a lot of real ninja techniques are not going to be revealed in a sport. Because real ninjas don't want that information out there. We don't want to let people know that we can like snap a neck very easily. You know, it's not as easy as it is in the movies. It's really not. But it's not as hard as some people think it is. But I'm not going to be revealing neck breaks in videos. I mean, I might take on an apprentice and teach the apprentice, or usually we use the term disciple, not to be confused with like, you know, other things, but usually we use the term disciple as like an apprentice of an art form. And trying to restrict an art is just a violation of the Constitution. You see, I defended the Constitution, and I think that some self-defense should be put out there. If anyone picks up some decent self-defense, or at least in principle, then I don't consider this, you know, a waste of time. Like if just one person, if anything from here actually helps somebody from being hurt, then it was not a waste. And it's not on my conscience if someone abuses it. You kind of have to throw that risk out there. And of course I leave enforcing someone who would abuse it, you know, enforcing that to the authorities. So anyways, moving on to some ninja techniques of, you got Kata and Bonki, right? You have the dance version and you have the real world application. Okay, there's some art forms out there, and I really don't know why. They put their finger on the side, on the handle, and they throw punches. Now if they were turning it to the side, getting ready to catch it, right, to throw it back around, I can see that. But actually punching, a real ninja is probably going to be using the pointy end. A real shinobi will use the side with the pointy end. And if someone tries to throw a punch with their finger on it, we're going to do that same technique, very likely, of the serpent causes a wave, and we're going to parry it, grab the finger, snap their finger, and poke them with their own side. Just like with a tanpa, and that's what this is. This is a tanpa, or a side handle baton. It is not a whatever variation someone would call it, okay? And the most effective way to hold it is like this, or like this, okay? Holding it like it's an eskrima, or just a straight baton, is not as effective, in my opinion. Okay, it's much like the way the sai would be, right? If someone was to like hand this to me, it would be handing me a tanva. Sometimes you ought to question the techniques. Sometimes as ninja, like there are two rules in being an effective teacher. Rule number 1, never teach one single student everything you know. Okay, so sometimes I think that some people was taught by the real masters of martial arts to just lose at the hands of a real shinobi. I really do. So, and shinobi have been around for a very long time, and it's not very likely that they would be going away. If you look at just about every major conflict throughout history, the shinobi have really been there. Really. Anyways, won't get into that. Check out my other videos for that. Anyways, so, if you like the video, like, subscribe, share, comment, and check out my other videos. Again, share my video with people who are ninja, but not with people who ought to be ninja because they might accidentally learn something. So until next time, my friends, stay ninja.